Hey everyone. Hi, my name is Shail Mehta. I am the CEO and co-founder of Last Gameboard. But before I introduce myself, I think that it's more relevant to introduce our incredible panelists. And thank you all, first of all, for joining. Thank you for being a part of this panel. I'm super excited and I'm a huge fan, so I will try to control all of it, but I make no promises. Mike, I'm going to start with you. If you could start a little bit introduction on who you are, a little background, and maybe what you're playing right now.
I'm Mike West, creative director at Flaming Fowl Studios. We're just finishing Gloomhaven Digital. I've been in the industry 26 years, worked on Fable for 12, been playing RPGs since the early 80s. So yeah, games is my life really. Actually looking to open a villa in Italy, which is where I've moved, which is going to be a geek retreat with loads of RPGs and computer games and Xboxes and everything else. So that's what we're doing on the side in my family as well. So yeah,
Love that.
games, basically.
Love it. Oh my gosh, that's incredible. I assume we're all invited to your villa.
Yeah,
Of course. Yeah, you have to bring games with you.
that's not a problem.
Exactly. Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike. Okay, Doug.
Hey, I'm Doug. I am a lead writer and a game designer for our World Walker games. We released our game Wildermyth, our first game this past June. We were working on that for thank you very much. We were working on that for almost 8 years, something like that. Off and on, it started as just a little passion project and kind of bloomed into something else.
It's so beautiful what it's turned into. I mean, bloom, I think, is the right word for it because it's just a majestical story and I love the environment. It's just, you've done an extraordinary job.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Yeah. All right, Lynn, talk to us about yourself.
Hello, I'm Lynne Hardy. I am the Associate Editor for the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game at Chaosium and also the line editor for the upcoming Rivers of London game. I've been writing and editing for role-playing games for coming up on 30 years now, which is absolutely horrendous thing to have to admit to. And at the moment, we've just finished playing Psychonauts 2, which is an amazing game as video games. And tonight, I will actually be playing in my friend's hybrid game called In the Dark Woods, where we're all fairies and pixies doing nefarious things in a fairy tale setting.
Oh, I love that. That sounds amazing. Sounds so cool. Awesome. Thank you so much. Violet, tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name is Violet Fermin. I am the D&D Adventures Lead Consultant for Fantasy Grounds, a virtual tabletop through which you can play various RPGs. I also am like a local organizer for conventions and events where we host D&D Adventures League games. What am I playing right now? I'm actually I'm my group where we play Pathfinder D&D Mesh on Fantasy Grounds is kind of paused right now, but that's usually like my big game. I take the lore from one and the mechanics from the other and put them together.
I like that. Oh, that's fascinating. I want to learn more about that. That's so cool. Okay, Carl.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carl Jackson from Nomad Games. I'm the design director. I've been in the games industry since the mid-90s, and I've had various roles in that time, but Nomad Games are more widely known for working on digital adaptations of board games, most notably Talisman, which is now 7 or 8 years old, I think, and still really popular and still gets lots of players, which is fantastic. I've personally been playing, I'm an avid board game player, so relevant to this discussion, I've actually been playing a board game called Role Player. I'm not sure if anybody's heard of that. A fantastic game where the entire game is about creating a RPG character. That's the whole game. But it's a fantastic game.
Yeah, I was like, wait, what is it? Say what it's called again?
Role Player.
Role Player.
But roll as in roll a dice. Role Player.
Roll a dice. Yeah.
Great game.
Oh, I love that. Oh, that sounds fascinating. You know, I think it's really interesting how everyone in even just our introductions, right? We've been talking about a little bit of nostalgia, how we address and how we grew up and how we're a part of this industry for so many years, right? I mean, I learned English by playing board games. I know that's hard to believe, but it's, you know, I feel like, and this is going to sound extremely nerdy, but gaming is almost like math. It's this great equalizer, right? You almost don't even need to know the language before you start playing it and you start learning from it. And I think, I mean, just in the light conversations we've had just for the past few minutes, I think it's the truth of who we are, right? Like we have this connection because of it. And hybrid RPGs and hybrid board games that are coming to life have been, for me personally, inspired by so much of your guys' work, right? So we kind of take a different approach at Gameboard. So what we're doing is we're bringing a physicality element to digital hybrid RPGs and tabletop games, right? Our technology allows for people to use minis, use cards, use dice on the surface of Gameboard. So we're trying to push into a next evolution of what it means to be hybrid and what it means to play. And I think each of you have done such an incredible job in fostering that narrative and story. So I'm going to go down the line, but I want to start with Mike first. I mean, Gloomhaven in and of itself is a hybrid of a hybrid, right? I mean, it's like a board game, it's an RPG, and now it's coming to Steam in, like you said, 2 weeks, which is very, very exciting. But how important was it for you when you were creating, the digital version of Gloomhaven to be true to its roots? And what are the things that you focused on creatively and with the narrative of Gloomhaven as you're building the entire game?
Yeah, so it's been an interesting experience, Gloomhaven. Obviously, I've been a digital designer, programmer, scripter, whatever, for all the time I've been in the industry, and I've not made a physical board game. Right? I'm a digital guy, strategy games, role playing games, all stuff like that, but all digital. So I've always designed games knowing they're going to be made digitally, which means you design them in a very certain way. Which obviously some of the guys and girls on the call are going to get that straight away. You don't make everything unique. You go, right, we're going to have this system, and then we're going to use that in all these places and get the most use out of it and the most reuse out of it.
Yeah.
That's not Gloomhaven, right? Gloomhaven is an absolutely gigantic number of individual rules which are only used once. And for a creative director to take the #1 rated board game, on Board Game Geek, which is what I've always used for like the last 10, 15 years of my board game life. I've played over, I own 150 board games. I've had about 500 in my life. So I'm a huge board gamer. And yeah, that the real challenge for us was we couldn't take Gloomhaven and go, yeah, we'll do a digital interpretation of it and change all the rules and make it, use all the same systems everywhere. And yeah, we won't do this, we won't do that, and we'll just throw these things away because it's the #1 board game, at the moment that's ever been made. We can't just come along and change it because all the people that want to play the digital version of it want to play Gloomhaven. So what did we do on sticking to the roots? We stuck as close to the roots as we possibly could. And the other big challenge we had over we've been in early access for a very long time, and the reason is because the game is so big. There's so many characters in it, there's so many abilities in it, there's so many enemies in it, there's so many levels in it. We couldn't just on day one go, right, here's the whole game. It's fully bug tested. The millions of combinations of the possible number of things that can possibly happen every single turn have all been tested to death. I mean, we couldn't do that. So we've had to go through this really interesting, very long early access to really get the community to help us, to get them to find all the weird and wonderful combinations. And the first rule of Gloomhaven we've decided is everyone is playing Gloomhaven wrong. It's been a really eye-opening experience for the gamers who come onto our Discord server and say, well, this rule's wrong, and then we talk to them about it and go, actually no, if you look at this forum and you go here and you see Isaac's comment on this, and it's
I love that.
learns. Yeah, and the great thing is obviously Isaac's been really, really helpful as well. There was a few areas of the game we couldn't implement. There's one ability, for example, which gives a character the ability to swap a card with any other character, which meant out of the 17 characters, which each have 30 cards, which each have 2 abilities, so 60 abilities per character, then you could give any one of those, 1,300 abilities to any other character in the game at any point, and therefore every ability, and we're just like, no, we're not doing that. So, we had to redesign certain aspects of certain things so that the game was possible. And there's other things like there was every time you're attacked, you have the opportunity to use this, so the game had to pause. It's like, that's terrible. That's not fun. So we redesigned 1 or 2 items to say this automatically happens, this instead of you get the choice, because you don't want to have to press no, 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 every round. So it's been really, really interesting. It's been a fantastic challenge, and I'd already backed the game. And the first thing I backed it on the second Kickstarter, and it
Nice.
arrived, and then we signed the deal, and I didn't even know we were signing the deal. And we signed the deal, and the first thing I did when I opened the box was I had to open every part of the flipping $200 board game I just bought, and basically I never got to play it. So yeah, it's been great, but that was my personal disaster. Was yeah, I was like, what does this do? I got to open every single card.
I have no idea.
look at everything.
I mean, I
Yeah.
think you hit it so eloquently, right? Like, I think one of I think the reason why we all focus so much on digital is kind of alleviating the pain points and alleviating the pain problems that
Yes.
people have when they're playing physical games. And for anyone to expect there to be just a complete, digital representation of something that you play physically is just not possible. You're trying to optimize gameplay while keeping it immersive, keeping the storytelling going. And I think that the fact that you crowdsourced that you had the beta, that you had people come in and give input and then take that constructively, right? Not take all of it, because I'm sure there was a lot of noise involved in everything, but to take it, which parts of it you pulled out the best, I think would illustrate the game more strongly, right?
Yeah, it was really useful for us as well, because we couldn't release the campaign. You can't release 95 quests. You can't say here's 10 quests of the campaign and totally break the
Right.
story. I mean, the Wildermyth guys know. I love Wildermyth, by the way. Cool for me. Very
Beautiful.
good.
Yeah.
You can't just give away a little bit of a story and then go, you can't go any further. That's it. You're stuck now. So we had to create a whole other campaign of actually has 150 quests on top of the 95 you get in the game to allow us to
Yeah.
release content and get that played. And right at the beginning, lots of people are like, this isn't my Gloomhaven. This isn't the character. You don't have all the characters. You don't have all the enemies. Boo, lots of downvotes, right? And I think we came out initially and we were like 82%, which sounds quite good, but we were like, 82. But now we're hitting like 95% in all of our ratings, because everyone was like, yeah, it's all there now.
That's
It's great.
awesome.
But we've had to get there, and it's been it's a battle, but it should be a
Yeah, it's a
battle. You
battle.
should have to, if you're making, for us, we're making the #1 game. We have to do it justice. So it's not a 2D representation of, pieces on a board. We have to do it in 3D. And that's where, a lot of our guys' knowledge of making, AAA games for decades, because we're all old. That's where it's come to the fore, really. And that's where we've been able to do it. And with our publisher, it's been that banter of, getting the best out of the budget and the timeline and everything like that. And that's the challenge of digital games, really.
No, that's so true. And I think, I mean, you hit on it with like Wildermyth, right? I think, Doug, you guys have this really incredible, detailed hybridization approach to your storytelling of like tabletop and what RPG is. Like, what procedures, or like, what did you think of when you were actually creating the story and creating the world?
Yeah. It happened over such a long time that it was such an evolution, I think. From at the start, we were basically inspired by XCOM, right? The XCOM game, Enemy Unknown, that came out in like 2012 or whatever. And we loved that game. We kind of wanted to take it to a fantasy setting and bring in, I think, because for me personally, as a player, like playing a game like XCOM or really anything, like I'll play a sports game, right? And I will have these like narratives and ideas running through my head for like the players on the field, or in a game like XCOM, like for the characters on the grid, your soldiers, right? And even playing a game like Hero Quest was a favorite of mine as a kid. It kind of takes a lot of the DM. Yeah, it takes a lot of like the DM elements out of the game, right? But like playing a game like that where there isn't a lot provided for you narratively, so you're kind of making it up as you go. I think Wildermyth kind of started wanting to be a game that synthesizes that process like in the game itself, so that there's not as much pressure on the player to like come up with something and keep track of it like game to game and character to character. And so it evolved into this thing where we wanted to start like almost like it's almost modeled after the dynamic or the relationship between like a game master, a DM, and their players, right? If we think of like each Wildermyth character as a player, like there's a player behind each character, and like how does that player motivate that character, and how does the game interact with that character as the DM of the whole party? Um, so yeah, sorry, I'm getting myself lost here.
No,
But
I think what you're saying is right on the money, right? I think that it's about like figuring out how much are you going to leave to the theater of the mind, how much are you going
mhm,
to put into the characters, how much narrative do you put behind it, right? That's always the duality between hybrid experiences, right? With this physical digital merging that we're trying to do is like which part of it do we really put that much focus on, and which do we leave up to the player, because that is the central role, right? It's a player, it's me playing the game.
mhm.
Like how much do we leave it up to that? So I think what you're doing is absolutely brilliant. Do you have any specific, yes, I mean, you've talked about your inspirations to the game, but do you have any specific narratives that really helped you drive some of the really detailed characters that you've created?
Um, I think a lot of it does just come out of D&D campaigns you've played, or ones you've
Yeah.
listened to. Like there was definitely inspirations like with the actual play podcast that started coming out, um, where suddenly I think like almost similar to the Gloomhaven experience where players were playing it and realizing, oh, this is how you're supposed to play. Like I think
Yeah.
once I started listening to actual play D&D, I'm like, oh, like you can like go hard on this. Like you can really inhabit these characters. Your DM can I don't know. I think it opened my mind to so much of that, and so much of that kind of came into Wildermyth
Mhm.
as a result. And yeah, like I think something that the game started to become was just a way to play D&D with yourself,
Mm.
where you don't
Yeah.
you don't
Yeah.
you don't need to get your friends together. You don't need to match schedules with people. You can kind of just get some of that experience, and it's certainly not the same as playing with other people, but you at least get to enjoy that sort of role-playing experience where you don't know quite what to expect from the other players in the room, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think that's so true. It's like, how do you, we're like trying to optimize that physical play. And I mean, Lynn, you've said, you've been in this industry for such a long time. You've written such beautiful titles, beautiful narratives, beautiful stories and worlds that you've helped create. And I mean, what you're doing is so extraordinary because it's not just based off of a hybrid, right? You're even basing it off of a series of books as well. So talk to us a little bit about how do you take all these like elements from like books and tabletop and RPG and come up with these beautiful stories and characters.
Well, I think you have to look at RPGs as the hybrids by their very nature, because you're always sort of like cherry picking bits from all over the place. So your favorite books,
Yeah.
your favorite movies, your favorite comics. It's all this hybrid melting pot of everything that's ever influenced you, everything that you've ever found interesting, every museum you've ever visited, every history class you mostly slept through or
Awesome.
thoroughly enjoyed, so there's always little bits and bobs that sort of wind their way in there. And quite often, when I'm creating stuff, it can be just a sentence in a travel guide that will say something really weird and interesting, and you think, oh, now how can I use that? Obviously, working a lot on historical games and games that are based in the real world, um, you kind of need to be able to sell it as, it has to be realistic for people to identify with it, but you still have to put that weird twist on it. And one thing that years and years of research has taught me is that, to be quite honest, you don't have to look very hard to find weird stuff in the real world, that all you need to do is just tweak it ever so slightly to turn it into a terrifying Call of Cthulhu scenario, or some weird Rivers of London case. It's there around you, and it's just being open to ideas coming at you from any direction.
I love that. So it's like inspiration is living all around you, but I think it takes such a powerful and creative mind to think that too, right? To understand and absorb like the real world around you with like this fantasy world that I think all of us have in our head that lives at all times, but to kind of merge it into this like into this game that gives us that feeling that I'm really, in Berlin. I'm really in this place, and how do you kind of catapult that into that experience? Do you think that I mean, your inspiration, obviously the world around you and the storytelling in the fantasy worlds too, but when you are actually trying to create this hybrid approach, how much of technology and the physicality do you use, or is it just more about the story and trying to cherry pick like you were saying earlier, or is there certain aspects of tech that you lean on more heavily?
With the best will in the world, the internet only has so much information. This is it, because everybody thinks, oh, it's the internet, you can find anything you want on the internet. There are huge black holes of information void that, so I'm afraid you can see the gigantic pile of things behind me there. At the end of the day, sometimes you just have to go back to the old-fashioned paper route. But there is still a lot that you do need. You can use technology and internet search engines for. A lot of the books on there I only found that existed because I was using internet search engines. Obviously, certain commercial mapping programs that you get and apps that you get, naming no names, are fantastic. I've just been doing a whole load of art direction for Rivers of London. Obviously, Ben's books are set in London. They're set in a real city. A lot of the time, they're set on real streets. Now, a lot of my artists aren't British. They're certainly not from London. They don't know what these streets look like. So that's been tremendously helpful to go down Street View, grab a screen capture, and then draw little stick figures all over it to send to my artist to turn into something actually, good.
Oh my
that will
gosh,
look
that's
really
so
great in a book.
brilliant.
So fantastic use of that kind of technology. It's one of the things we've actually really sort of found as a bit of a challenge writing and designing Rivers, because we
Interesting.
started designing it just as the pandemic kicked in. So
Mm.
we've had to really think hard about how people are going to be playing this game. Whereas normally a lot of role-playing rule books are written from the default perspective is that you're in a place and you're all around the same table. Well, we can't assume that anymore. Increasingly,
Right.
we are relying on something like Discord, as we are now, to actually facilitate that gaming and other online gaming platforms and support materials. So we've started to include sections on, well, how do you work out what order people go in a combat if you're doing it over a screen? Because I can guarantee that my view of all of you is totally different to Shail's view of all of us. So you can't just go, oh, we're going to go clockwise around the screen, because that's
Right.
different for everybody. So, it's just having to
Yeah.
consciously think now about bringing in how people use technology to game, to make sure that we're covering and giving advice to people who are using all these different platforms and techniques. So,
That's
role playing
great.
is theatre of the mind, but not everybody can work that way. Some people like to have miniatures. How do you do that if you're online? I know we've got people here who are going to tell us how we can do that. Um, but it's being, again, aware of the technology and thinking carefully about how we can bring that in to facilitate our players and their ability to tell stories together.
Yeah, I love that. I think that to be so cognizant of the time that we are, while, I mean, something that I think we're all doing beautifully is we're fighting and we're combating isolation, right? We're trying to figure out how people can connect together more efficiently. And how do you be cognizant of what's happening in the world? And how do you be cognizant of what's occurring in our time and reflect that in our stories and our narrative? Like, that's key to what we're building. And Carl, like, Talisman, right? I mean, I love Talisman, first of all. Huge fan, love Talisman. But I mean, you have this legacy of like hybridization at Nomad, right? You've done physical, digital. You do it on such a number of fronts, and there's always additions and expansions that you're doing. How have you kind of navigated through different iterations, different versions? Like, how do you conceptualize the future of where Talisman could go?
Well, I think when we were first working on Talisman, we knew that our license covered things that had been created physically and existed physically. So the expansions for Talisman, that was kind of our limit of where we could go. So the great guys over at Fantasy Flight Games were creating Talisman Expansions, and we were just kind of digitizing what they'd already done. They'd put the time in, they'd done the design work, the balancing, playtesting, and we just kind of digitized it. I say just, it's not as simple as that. But, they did a lot of the hard work. And then we got to a point where we ran out of physical expansions because we'd made them all. And in the early days, we kind of assumed that after a few years, people will have moved on. People wouldn't be playing our version of Talisman anymore. But actually, it was the opposite. It's just as popular now, probably more so, than when it first came out 7 years ago, which has really surprised us because, if you talk to board game fans, board game players, there is a slight sort of negative view of games like Talisman, too luck-based, too risky, not enough strategy, that kind of thing. But some people really like that. And so it's a really popular game still, and it's stood the test of time. It's been out for 38 years now, I think, coming up next month.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been a long time. I mean, it was originally commissioned by Ian Livingston and Steve Jackson at Games Workshop. And I had the pleasure of sitting next to Steve Jackson a couple of years ago at an awards ceremony. And I had read somewhere that he actually invented the phrase role-playing game. He actually came up with it. He was the very first person to say RPG role-playing game.
I believe that.
Yeah. Well, I asked him if it was true, and he he didn't deny it. He also couldn't confirm that it was him. But I was actually, just to be sat next to the person who came up with the phrase RPG role-playing game was quite insane, really.
So cool.
But anyway, so yeah, fast forward 38 years. And so we ran out of physical products to make and started to look at digital exclusive expansions then. And that's where we thought, well, what do people want to be able to do with a physical game that they can't do? There might be things that, you can display digitally that aren't possible on a board. So we started having ideas like giant monsters stomping across the board, or when the player dies, instead of that just being game over, you actually turn into a ghost, and then you can go and haunt the other players. Which,
that's great.
To display that digitally on a screen is very easy, and to get that across in a board game on a table is much harder. So we make the whole game go all eerie and negative and look really strange. And like I say, giant monsters stomping around. So we started to think, well, we can release exclusive digital expansions for this game without the limitations of what the physical guys had to deal with, of people knowing what all the rules are, where everyone's up to, and balancing issues. So we realised we had quite a lot to work with, and we are still working on Talisman. We are still looking at content. The demand is still there. So, well, as Mike said earlier, we've also had the same problem with where people weren't quite playing it in the way that we thought they should be playing it. So you run into situations where the rules say you may do this thing, and so we're saying, well, we can't just keep asking players, do you want to do this thing? Because the rules say you may do this thing. Otherwise, the game's interrupting and pausing constantly. So we had to just make a lot of assumptions to keep the game flowing. I mean, obviously, when you sat around a table, the game kind of flows anyway, and there's banter and there's jokes and laughing at other people's mistakes and things like that. But when you're playing a game digitally and you can't see the other players, then we just need to keep it flowing. We just made some rule assumptions. Just say, well, instead of saying you may do this thing, we're saying you can't.
Oh, I love that.
So
you
can. That's what we had to do. So it's gone really well.
I think that, one of the things that you guys at Nomad do in Talisman, I mean, so we have this thing at Gameboard where it's called, where we're pushing to get it out, it's called chaos mode, where rules are out the door and you can do what you want to do in gameplay, right? But it gives this element of like why people play board games. Like people like to cheat, people like to have their own enforcements and their rules, right? And how do you give weight to that, and how do you create that experience of like, hey, I am playing in real life and I'm playing with people, but I have this digital enhancement of me and I want to push it to the absolute limit of what I do. And Talisman, for me, like that immersive play of being able to go into this world, and I personally think that it's lasted the test of time because it's really, really fun to play. So I think keeping that element alive in what we're doing with hybrid approaches and with game approaches is key. And you said it so great, right? And Violet Fantasy Grounds, I have to talk about how you're kind of merging all these different types of TTRPGs together in a singular platform. And I'm going to set it up for you a little bit, but one of the things is the main things that we get is like people take TVs and they put them in dining room tables and they try to blast maps. And that was actually literally one of the reasons why I started Gameboard, because we did that. We did that exact situation and tried to figure out, how the hell can I make this like more immersive? How can I make this a more solid experience? So I'd love to hear from you and talk more about what Fantasy Grounds is doing and how you guys take hybridization to the next level.
For sure. Well, I think the easiest way for me to kind of explain how Fantasy Grounds can kind of allow for the merging of the virtual and the physical is talking about how I started using it. A lot of people, I think previously the idea of a virtual tabletop was it's just online on the screen if I can't meet in person. But for me, I actually started using Fantasy Grounds for in-person games. So I pushed some pictures of me at a convention, and I did exactly what you said. At some point, I was really tired of printing maps and taking the time to tape them together. And I think at one point I invested in a huge printer, and I was just like, there has to be something better than this for me to be able to run my games and be able to include visuals and be able to include like sound and all of this other elements. And so I looked into different software, and what really kind of drew me to Fantasy Grounds was being able to project maps and pictures of monsters, being able to blow up puzzles so that everyone can see it on a TV. But also, since it functions both online and off, I can bring my laptop, and if there's no internet at the convention, which is really common at some of the conventions I've gone to, I can still access like my notes. I can still access my like adventure, my pictures, my maps. So rather than carrying, all these books and trying to keep things in folders, I can just have it on my Surface, my laptop. So
Love that.
yeah, there's a lot of different. I think your limit with how you use the software is really up to your imagination, because you'll see with Fantasy Grounds especially, there's people who are constantly coming up with new things to integrate. And one of the great things is it's not inaccessible. Other people can make extensions for it. And so I've seen people implement, for example, shops. How many times have we had to sit there and like, okay, I got to build a shop. I'm going to roll the dice for each thing one by one. That's a lot easier to do with the click of a button. So people have made like extensions to show different inventory and be able to generate it and show it to the players, or templates. Something that you usually randomize on the fly. Again, instead of having to roll like 10 different dice and look it up in a book and then write it down, you can click a button and suddenly this template that has a lot of blanks that draw to these different tables is generated, and you're good to go.
I think ease of play is like always on the forefront of everyone's mind, right? When they go to VTTs and they go to this hybrid approach, ease of play. How are you making it more better for me to play? We live in such a consumer-driven environment, right? Where it is the Netflix and binge model, right? Where it's like, I want it now, and I want it to work, and it better be flawless, right? Like that is what gamers, that is what consumers are demanding. And then to be able to offer that in a very like cohesive way, to be like, here, I've packaged this up so nicely for you. Like I think Fantasy Grounds does such a beautiful job of doing that. And you touched on something really powerful, right? It's like, and I'll open this up. I want you guys to all kind of chime in and tell me. I'll stop individually picking on everyone. But what sort of technology do you guys think is the future of RPGs, of tabletop, of TTRPGs? Like, where could we go? Do you see this as like this metaverse of RPGs colliding on the back end? Or do you see more of an approach, of a hybridization approach, where we continue to evolve and continue to find this balance between digital and physical? So I'll open that question up a little bit and see what you guys think. Lynn.
I'm going to show my age. I had never thought about using a virtual tabletop at an actual physical table. I was still totally stuck in the headspace of no, it's only the sort of thing that you use when you can't physically get somewhere. That is just an amazing idea. Thank you so much for that. So I mean that's something for my future, is like, well, as and when we get back to doing that again. yes, it's actually using that. I've not used Fantasy Grounds. It is something I do need to look into. But no, that is an incredibly powerful idea. I'm also going to swipe somebody else's answer from another panel I was on for this festival. And that was augmented reality. I mean, you're doing your wonderful tabletop things there, your battlegrounds things where you're having the maps that you can put miniatures on. But maybe we can bring in augmented reality to actually have,
Yes.
little things moving around and what have you. So I think that's fascinating. I'm never going to give
Yeah.
these up though. You will
No.
pry this from my cold dead hand, I'm afraid.
Honestly, like what you're saying is like it's literally what for us like Gameboard was. It's like you want to have this technology, but you want to have the physicality, right? You want to have the physical side, and you want it to interact. You don't want it just to be a TV screen. You want it to be interactive, and you want it to respond, and you want to retain information. How do you create that environment, right? Of using VTTs and using and pushing the limits of what existing hardware and technology could be today, right? Because that's so true. You want to keep your minis. You want to keep you want to keep the things why we love to play RPGs, but with that injection of technology and like keeping true to it too.
I'm personally I'm always interested in the back end, the meat, being a coder at heart,
Yep.
and the back end, the meat of the storytelling and the choices and the consequences, right? Again, right, Fable, choice and consequence. We penned the phrase many years ago, there's not a lot of it in the world. Obviously, Wildermyths, again, mention you guys again, but there's a lot of choices in that. And I had a character in that. I've got a character in that called Groofius, and he goes around, he just moans about everything. And I love the fact that he moans about everything, and he's a real, angry kind of guy.
Yes.
Associate with it, right? So my question actually to Douglas is, I love Groofius, but no one else is going to have Groofius, right? Now, obviously, there will be the grumpy guy, and he'll be in some people's games. But if, as writers and as designers, we're able to, create actual characters and give them proper backstories and everything, you'll get stronger stories out of that. But the random generalization and or generation neural networks, I've worked on neural networks in the past and things like that. We can generate these stories, but will they ever be as good as handwritten stories, if you see what I mean? Because as I say, he was great, but there can be people who play Wildermyth and will never see him and will never see his story arc. And he's my favorite. I've got other characters I don't like quite as much. And I'm like, everyone should see him. He's great, right? But he doesn't exist anywhere else. He only exists on my machine. So it's kind of a question for you.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. I think like so much of what we try to do as far as like bringing the tabletop vibe to a digital game is like it's so easy when you're at a tabletop, like in a tabletop environment, you come away with so many memories, like that you come away with this rich like just trove of like, remember when this person did this thing or this person did that thing and their character blah blah blah, right? You come away with those things, those stories to tell, and that's so much of what you're trying to do, I think, as a digital game designer, is to create like make a system that just generates those moments for players over and over again, right? And so yeah, like that is one side of it, where you come away with the story of Groofius or any character that maybe comes up that's generated. Like you do also want there to be space for the player to express themselves in the characters and in the narrative as much as possible. Choices do a lot of that in Wildermyth, where you like make the decision to either commit to like this forest god has this offering for you, and like do you take it, do you throw it back in their face? Like what are the things that a player in D&D would do, right? Like someone is definitely going to like try to fight the forest god for some crazy reason, right? Like finding ways to like reproduce those choice moments that help you feel like you're taking part in the story, and then in generating those moments that you can share with others. I think Wildermyth also has an online component that sort of came about just like as an April Fool's joke at the end of development, that ended up taking off, and so that's something that we could definitely explore more. I think it's interesting too, thinking about just the cross-pollination of the tabletop and the digital space, where maybe you can take part in this sort of experience and share these characters with others in some form. I'm not sure what that looks like, but it's definitely a cool idea. And yeah, I think you also mentioned, will it ever be as good as something that's just written for a unique individual character? It is tricky. Like all of Wildermyth is fully written. It's not about linking text, like just automated. It is fully written, and you get lines that are kind of chosen for the character based on like aspects, their history, their personality, their the choices that they've made in the past in this playthrough. So there's a lot of effort to get to that point where it does feel like a unique story that's being written for you and for your character. And so I think it's something that we'll continue to iterate on, maybe with Wildermyth definitely going forward, and also maybe with our next games, whatever those happen to be. Sorry, I took up a bunch of time there.
No, I think that was extremely insightful. I think that, and so tell me, like, where do you see the next implementation, the next version? Like, is there any technologies? What would you like to see infused a little bit more when you're building, the next game?
There's so many lessons that we learned from this, I think, where we could just build the systems a lot better to handle like personal history, whether you're an orphan, whether you're like what your background is. We have those things in Wildermyth, but we didn't quite get it to the point where they just like link up super easily with the text.
Yeah.
So there's a lot we could do there that would sort of amplify who that character is at their core. Because like when you come into a D&D campaign with your character, you just have this idea of like, this is the thing that means the most to them in their life. Like when they were a kid, their brother like betrayed the family, and so they have this thing where they need to go find their brother and confront them. Like if you could get a story like that to just like kind of happen for a character, I think we could get there. Wildermyth doesn't quite do that yet, but yeah.
Yeah, the next iteration, the next edition and adventure. That's so exciting though. I love that you guys are thinking about that already, and just with even releasing it now. So Carl, like Nomad has always like pushed the limits. You've tried to embrace as much technology as you can, and with everything that you guys are working on, what is next for you? What are you hoping to work on next? Whether it's game creation or with hybridization of any sort of adaptation of existing tabletop or RPG games. What's next for you guys?
Well, we've kind of dabbled with a bit more storytelling with some of our games. So we released a version of Talisman called Talisman Origins, which because over the years we had so much feedback from customers about. There's one story that always sticks in my mind of a guy emailed us saying that he used Talisman on a mobile device on his phone tablet as a story generator to read his daughter bedtime stories. So they were just randomly moving around the board, fighting goblins, finding treasures, and his daughter absolutely loved it. And we had a lot of feedback like that over the years, and I just thought it's so nice to hear that people are using what you've created in that way. And hopefully that girl will remember that for the rest of her life, that game was used to tell her stories at nighttime. So we thought, well, we need to focus a little bit more on this, and we made this game Talisman Origins where it was just story based. It's not a multiplayer game, it's just you with stories that we've come up with, and we went through folklore, folk tales across Europe, and your classic kind of rescuing the princess and fighting the dragons and all that kind of thing, and we really enjoyed that. And so we're going to look at that kind of area for future things that we do, instead of just taking a board game as it is, as you get in the box. If you want that experience, you can still go and buy the box and enjoy that. But we want to try and offer something a bit different, so that what's going on in this box. This is just a board with some pieces on it, and you're just moving around and having your own experience. But what if this world was real? What if there was actually people living in the tavern? What would they be going through? And just try and expand on the stories a little bit. And that's the kind of thing that people have in their imaginations while they're playing anyway. The best graphics are your imagination, I think.
No, that's so true. I mean, I love that, that's what everyone here is kind of touching on, is like this back end universe that perhaps that can be propelled more. And Mike, you said it so great, like that character narrative and like, owning what that back end side of that does, and like really understanding, how is that relevant to this universe, this adventure that we're trying to make. And Violet, I know I'm sorry, my headphone fell out of my ear. My bad. Sorry. Violet, you were talking a little bit about fantasy grounds, and I know Lynn mentioned that really beautifully, right? Like this immersion of like, how do we embrace AR? How do we embrace hybridization in a completely new way? Is Fantasy Grounds thinking about doing something a lot more associated with colliding of universes? What is the future of Fantasy Grounds and RPGs for you?
Well, I think honestly, a lot of the tools that one can use to really world build and story build and kind of redefine how you think about when you're prepping is already there. Things like, so for example, I used to bring notebooks full of like notes, and you might have to reference like 3 or 4 books. Like, in this book is this description of this character, while here is my write up of the town, and this is the image I need to show at this point. And I don't really see prep work like that anymore. For me now, Fantasy Grounds has kind of changed how I prep, where I might have one story template, or sorry, story note, and I'm interlinking to other things. And it's actually allowed me to better think about how I want to improv, how I want to present the world, because I'm not having to look in 3 or 4 different books to remember this detail about how in this town, the wind chimes chime in a certain way and it causes a whistle. That's one of the towns from my game, from Paizo's universe. Because I can see the image, I can see the note, and I can also see, oh, this is the mayor that they're going to go, or this is the various districts. And so just being able to access that information more easily, I think more and more people are going to move towards thinking differently about how they use virtual tabletops to really kind of propel how they prep for games, how they present games. It's already been really great for me, just because I tend to lose things. Even on the computer, I'll lose where I put this link for this random music file or something like that. And now, with some of the extensions that people have built, I can link something like my Sirenscape as part of my notes. So I don't have to remember, oh, I wanted to play this track. And I think things like that are kind of floating in the back end. I don't want to say for sure that's what they're working on. But I know it's something that they've considered. And so sky's kind of the limit.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's a perfect segue into what I was going to ask next. It's like you're reading my mind. So this is specifically directed towards Lynn and Mike, but I mean, everyone chime in as you will. Mike, would you say, the people that played the traditional Gloomhaven is that who you think want to play the hybrid approach? Do you see digital as expanding to a wider audience? Like, are you catapulting and bringing in people who might have never played and, bought the Kickstarters and tried to open up the games as well?
Yeah, so I could talk about this for hours. Basically, I've got years and years and years of data on this. Years of conversations of people. If anyone wants to pick my brain about any of this, like, we are experts on digital board games and players coming from physical. And then you've got the pandemic, right? You've got COVID. You've got people can't play Gloomhaven together anymore.
Right.
So the weird thing about our company is we've always been remote. So we've never had an office. We've been going 5 years. We've never had an office. No, I've not met most of the developers. I don't know what half of them look like, because it doesn't matter. If they're good at their job, that's it. That's how we work, right? We're all about, results. And the players now are the same, right? They want to play Gloomhaven. The great thing for them, in some respects, not putting the board game down, but they don't have to spend 2 hours setting it up and playing it. They can just boot it up, off they go. 30 minutes later, a quest's done. So you're able to play it much, much faster and get a lot more experience out of it. But you're still able to communicate with people using stuff like Discord or any of the other systems online. So we are getting our primary audience for Gloomhaven is absolutely the physical market. They're the people who definitely got it in early access. They're the ones who've given us all the opinions and all the help and the feedback and telling us that we're wrong when some of the times we have been wrong and some of the times we haven't been wrong. And they're the people who've been absolutely hugely passionate. But at the same time, we also have a section of people who've never played Gloomhaven before, and they're coming in. And the problem we've had with those people is the difficulty ramp on the first game of Gloomhaven is almost vertical. Because if you're sitting around a table with 4 people, you're learning the game together, you're experiencing the rules. Maybe you're getting some rules wrong, and no one really cares because you're having fun, right?
Yeah.
But when you bash into Gloomhaven's not an easy game. It is a hard, brutal, it's Dark Souls, the board game, basically, right? You will die a lot. And you don't do that in RPGs either, right? In player-run RPGs, you don't kill your players because people stop coming and playing with you. Lynn will know that better than me. But so we've had, and to your points earlier as well of home, house rules and stuff like that. We've had to we can't do everything, right? So we've had to say we're making the base game, right? And we're doing the base rules, but we've added modding. So you can mod anything. You can create your whole campaign. You can add any character you want. You can add any enemy you want. You can do anything you want in it. We've allowed players to do that, but you need some technical ability to do that, obviously, because it's using YAML and you need to be a bit of a coder or whatever. And you have to use the assets we've got. So they have to look and sound like our characters that we've implemented. But some people are going off and doing that and making, characters from some of the Gloomhaven add-ons or making some of their own characters and stuff like that. And that's one of the things I would say is going to come in the future is more user content as well. It's very, very important. But yeah, so I think very quickly, I think the next thing we're looking at doing, obviously there's potential to do some other Gloomhaven-y stuff. I can't go into about that in too much detail until that's all sorted out. But the other
you guys are all holding out on me. Give me the juice. Okay, fine.
Well,
I'll take
we've been
it.
following you
Next
for
time.
12 years, right? You can't tell me to tell you things I'm not allowed to tell you, right? I know what happens.
Fine.
So I love Peter, by the way. Hi, Peter. But the other thing we're looking at doing is we now have a huge knowledge base of strategy turn-based role-playing games, right? And so we have that, but we want to make a game designed digitally. To right back to my first point that I made, and the first thing I said was Gloomhaven is not a digitally designed game; it's a physical designed game. So it's designed to be unique, and everything in it is use once, throw away. Whereas we can make a much more digitally focused game if we come up with what the rule systems are and we come up with the story and the characters and everything else. So that's one of the things we're also looking into doing at the moment. We're getting Gloomhaven out, but I'm in the middle of talking to publishers. I can probably go about that far. We're in some very interesting conversations of what we're doing next as well, and I think it fits this whole area, but I can't say any more than that because Craig will kill me. Exec producer, he won't be happy. CEO, he calls himself. Whatever.
I love that. No, thank you. Okay, Lynn, talk to me a little bit more. I know we have 5 minutes, but I would love to know like where you see, you mentioned AR a little bit, but what are you working on? What do you see as the future?
Well, obviously at the moment I'm trying to get Rivers of London edited up and out of the way. Not out of the way, that sounds terrible, you know what I mean.
No. Get it out for the world to experience.
Out into the world. No, it'll escape before it's ready. They always do. They just beat down the door and go for it when you're not looking. I mean, one of our goals with Rivers is we know that Chaosium has a core audience, and we hope that they will buy the book because it's from us. But we are trying to encourage new people in, and this is where the hybrid element comes in. Ben's books are incredibly popular amongst a demographic that isn't necessarily into role-playing games. Apparently sort of like a certain age group of women who like a gruesome murder per book, and but they love the fantasy element. So we're kind of hoping that we'll bring in new gamers by it, because we do need gamers. All of us on all of our platforms, we need new gamers, because otherwise things will stagnate and they will fall away. So it's always that, how do we bring new people in? So that's my key thing. And I think what we really need to think about most is using the technology and wherever it goes to increase accessibility to people who haven't gamed before, to people for whatever reason, be that they just don't know about it, it's the first time they've come across it, or because there have been barriers that have prevented them from taking part. And I think if we work out how to use it wisely, we can greatly enrich the entire field of gaming by bringing in other people and learning from them and listening to them and bringing their ideas into the stories that we're all trying to tell.
Oh, I love that. That's so true, and what you say about the audience, like COVID, I think we've all been affected by COVID, and one thing though it led to is people that were playing analog and they couldn't get together and they couldn't play, suddenly pushed online, and everyone was able to see the power that this industry actually has, right? And before, everyone is sitting there, I feel like I was yelling about it till I was blue in the face. I'm like, you have no idea, like this is a strong market, has huge potential, has huge purchasing power, but because everything is analog, you can't quantify it, you can't put metrics onto it. COVID hit, the world shut down, and everyone pivoted to digital, right? Like, let me get my hands on how I can replicate this experience. How can I still be immersed? How can I play with people that I still want to play? And it shed light to the power that digital, that hybrid, that what we do has an impact on lives, right? And it's so essential, especially with isolation, right? How do you break that down? How do you help people connect? How do you live in that story while maintaining the essence of why we love to play? And I think everyone here is doing such a brilliant job at keeping that wheel going, because like you said, bringing in more people and creating this ability to connect and unite over gaming is our mission, right? And doing it in a way that technology is not the end of it, but the creation of it. I know that sounds so dorky to say, but it's like we're using technology to fuel that interactivity, that connectivity, and to give that immersive experience. So I think that you all are doing such a brilliant job in doing this, and I want to thank you so much for being a part of this panel, and I want to thank the team at AROC, and I'm so excited for Digital Fest. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate your wisdom, your insight, and speaking with me about hybrid RPGs. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Good to meet you all. Keep
Take
making
care.
games.
Bye.